My father always said the land remembers. He'd say it with a quiet finality, his hand resting on a fence post, his eyes scanning the horizon where the fields met the sky. It was his mantra, his creed, the core of his personal gospel. After he passed, his brother Garland, my uncle, produced a new will, one that felt like it was written in invisible ink, signed in betrayal. It left him our entire family farm, a sprawling acreage that had been in our bloodline for a century, and it cut me out completely, cleanly, like a surgeon removing a tumor. I was the tumor. Garland was already pricing out developers, a smug, satisfied smile plastered on his face as he told me to pack up my father's things and leave my childhood home. He thought he'd won. He stood there, in the kitchen my mother had designed, the smell of her phantom baking still clinging to the air on a good day, and he gave me a week to erase a lifetime, a week to pack up the ghost of my father and the echo of my own childhood. But while I was cleaning out my dad's old surveying office, a small, dusty room that smelled of old paper and leather and the faint, metallic tang of his tools, I found it. Tucked away in a corner was a heavy leather tube, cracked with age. Inside there was a series of old topographical maps, their lines and contours as familiar to me as the lines on my own hand. And tucked inside the very last map, the one showing the gentle slope of the land down to the shimmering waterfront, was a legally filed deed. It was crisp, official, bearing the embossed seal of the county clerk. Years ago, my father had officially partitioned the most valuable waterfront acreage into a separate parcel, a parcel under my name. Tucked into the fold of the deed was a handwritten note on his old letterhead. The script was shaky from his later years, but the intent was ironclad. It said, "For my Ashlyn, they can have the dirt, you keep the heart." If you've ever been made to feel small, if you've ever been erased by people who should have protected you, then you know the cold fire that started burning in my chest in that moment. Stick with me and I'll tell you how I used my father's quiet love to turn that fire into an inferno. It helps to know I'm not just screaming this story into the void, so let me know in the comments if you've ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours. The meeting at the lawyer's office was a sterile, bloodless affair. The room was beige, the coffee was stale, and the air was thick with the kind of forced politeness that precedes an execution. My uncle Garland sat across the polished mahogany table, his suit just a little too tight, his tie knotted with an aggressive precision. He wasn't a farmer. He was a man who played at being a gentleman, a land baron in his own mind. He'd spent his life in the city, managing portfolios and chasing deals, viewing the farm as a line item, a dusty asset his brother was too sentimental to liquidate. He looked at me with a practiced pity that didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were small and hard, like pebbles. Mr. Thompson, the lawyer, a man whose family my father had known for 50 years, wouldn't meet my gaze. He just cleared his throat and slid the document across the table. The last will and testament of Harrison Croft. It felt wrong. My father's name on this cold corporate paper. I didn't need to read the whole thing. The legal jargon was a dense forest, but the clearing was brutally stark. Paragraph 4. I hereby bequeath the entirety of the property known as Blackwood Farm, its structures, and all associated assets, to my brother, Garland Croft. My name wasn't there. It was like I had never existed. I ran my finger over the page, feeling nothing. No texture, no warmth, just the cold, flat finality of the words. I looked up at Garland. The smug smile was there, lurking at the corners of his mouth. He was trying to suppress it, to maintain a facade of solemnity, but it was leaking out. It was a victory lap for him, the culmination of a lifetime of quiet resentment for his older brother, the one who stayed, the one who worked the land, the one my father was. Garland saw my father's love for the farm as weakness, a failure of ambition, and now, he was correcting that failure. He was cashing out. He leaned forward, the cheap leather of his chair groaning in protest. "Ashlyn," he said, his voice a low, condescending purr. "I know this is a shock. Your father, in his final months, He had moments of clarity. He realized the burden this place would be for you. He wanted you to be free, unencumbered. It was an act of love, really. The lie was so audacious, so insulting, it almost took my breath away. An act of love. To render me homeless, to steal my birthright. I just stared at him, my face a mask of stone. I learned long ago from my father that the loudest person in the room is usually the weakest. Silence is its own kind of power. My silence seemed to unnerve him. He fidgeted with his cufflinks. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, shuffling papers that didn't need shuffling. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner of the office was the only sound, each tick a hammer blow against my composure. Finally Garland broke. "Look," he said, his tone shifting from fake sympathy to brisk business. "The developers are already interested. A premier group from the city. We're talking a legacy project. Golf course, condos, a marina. This land is finally going to live up to its potential." My stomach twisted. My father's land, the soil he had nurtured, the trees he had planted, paved over for a golf course. It was a desecration. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "I'll need you to clear out the house. Say, a week. Take whatever personal effects you want. Mementos. But the furniture, the equipment, that all stays. It's part of the estate." He walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at me, the smile finally breaking free, wide and triumphant. "This is a good thing, Ashlyn. A new beginning for everyone." Then he was gone, leaving me in the beige room with the stale coffee and the ghost of my father's name on a piece of paper that meant nothing. I sat there for a long time, the lawyer refusing to look at me, until the only thing I could feel was a profound, arctic cold spreading through my veins. It wasn't grief. Grief was a warm, messy thing. This was something else. This was the quiet, chilling clarity of betrayal. Driving back to the farm was like moving through a dream. The familiar turns in the road, the canopy of old oaks that lined the lane, the sight of the white farmhouse cresting the hill. It all felt alien, like a set from a movie about someone else's life. My home. For one more week, I parked the truck, but didn't get out. I just sat there, the engine ticking as it cooled, and watched the light fade over the western fields. This was my low point. The mask I had worn in the lawyer's office crumbled, and the raw, unvarnished grief I'd been holding at bay since my father's funeral came rushing in, amplified by the fresh wound of Garland's betrayal. It was a physical thing, a weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel, the plastic cool against my skin, and I finally let myself break. The tears weren't loud or dramatic. They were silent, hot, and endless. They were for my father, for the quiet, steady man who had been the fixed point in my universe. And they were for me, for the little girl who used to follow him through these fields, her small hand lost in his calloused one. My father wasn't a man of grand pronouncements. His love was in his actions, in the things he taught me. I closed my eyes, and the memories came flooding back, not as gentle comfort, but as sharp, painful reminders of what I was losing. I remembered being 10 years old, standing with him on the bluff, overlooking the creek that fed into the lake. He had his old surveyor's transit set up, a beautiful brass and steel instrument that seemed like a magical device to me. He let me look through the eyepiece, showing me how to read the measurements on the stadia rod he'd set up on the far bank. He wasn't just teaching me a skill, he was teaching me to see past the surface, Ashlyn, he'd said. People see a field and think of crops, or they see a waterfront and think of boat docks, but you have to see the bones of the land, the way the water flows, the grade of the slope, the type of soil. The land has a story, and if you know how to read the map, you can hear it. He taught me to read topographical maps like they were novels, each contour line a sentence, each elevation marker a piece of dialogue. He showed me how the tight cluster of lines meant a steep, dramatic cliff, and the wide, lazy spacing meant a gentle, buildable meadow. He believed the land held its own memory, its own truth, and that a good surveyor was just an interpreter, translating that truth for the human world. And Garland was always there, in the background of these memories, a discordant note in the harmony of the farm. I remembered a summer barbecue, years ago. Garland had driven up from the city in his flashy, sterile sedan that looked ridiculous, parked next to my father's dusty pickup truck. He'd stood on the porch, a gin and tonic in his hand, and gestured dismissively at the fields. "Harry, you're sitting on a gold mine," he'd said, his voice carrying across the lawn. "A damn gold mine. And you're using it to grow hay. It's malpractice." My father had just smiled, that quiet smile of his. "It's not a gold mine, Garland. It's a home. And it's not growing hay. It's growing peace and quiet." Garland had just shaken his head, a look of pity on his face. He truly believed my father was a fool, a simple man blind to the world of opportunity. He never understood that my father saw a different kind of opportunity, a different kind of wealth. He never saw the value in the way the morning mist settled in the low-lying fields, or the sound of the wind through the ancient pines that lined the northern edge of the property. To Garland, if you couldn't put a dollar figure on it, it didn't exist. And now, I was back in that moment, sitting in the truck, the weight of his worldview crashing down on me. He thought he was freeing me from a burden. The arrogance of it was staggering. This farm wasn't my burden, it was my anchor. It was the only place on earth where I felt completely and utterly myself. My father and I had started a small business on the side, a passion project that Garland probably didn't even know existed. We had a small apple orchard on the south-facing slope, a mix of heirloom varieties you couldn't find in a grocery store. We'd built a small cider press, and we made small batch hard cider, Blackwood cider. It wasn't a big operation. It was more about the craft, about continuing a tradition. My father handled the orchard. I handled the brewing and the branding. It was our thing. The logo I designed was a simple, elegant drawing of the great oak that stood on the bluff. To Garland, that orchard was just a patch of inconvenient trees waiting for a bulldozer. To me, it was a living collaboration with my dad, a legacy I was supposed to carry on. The tears subsided, replaced by a cold, hard knot of resolve in my stomach. Hey! I finally got out of the truck. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and coming rain. I walked into the house, and it felt different. The silence was heavier, the shadows were longer. Garland's presence, his greed, had tainted it. He wanted me to pack up mementos. Fine, I would pack. But I wouldn't be packing memories to take into exile. I would be searching for ammunition. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that my father would not have left me defenseless. He was a surveyor, a planner, a man who saw the bones of the land in the hearts of men. He knew his brother. He knew Garland's greed was a force of nature, as predictable as erosion. He would have made a plan. He would have drawn a map, and I was going to find it. My resolve solidified. I wasn't going to just mourn. I was going to excavate. The first place I would start was his office, the one place Garland, in his haste and dismissal of my father's hobby, would never think to look for anything of value. The heart of the farm, my father's sanctuary. That was where the truth would be. The breakdown was over. The fight was just beginning. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself, the phrase forming in my mind like a prayer. It was about honor. It was about proving that my father's love was a more powerful force than my uncle's greed. My father's office was less a room and more a time capsule. It was a small, lean-to addition he'd built himself off the back of the house, with a separate entrance so he could meet with clients without them tramping through the kitchen. Garland had probably never set foot in it in his life. The air inside was still and thick, saturated with the scent of old paper, sun-baked leather, and the faint, clean smell of graphite. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light, slanting from the window. Nothing had been touched since he'd passed. His drafting table was still angled just so, a half-finished drawing of a neighbor's property line dispute still taped to its surface. His tools, the compasses, the protractors, the specialized rulers, lay in a neat row, waiting for a hand that would never return. It felt like a sacred space, and I felt like a trespasser. But I was also a daughter on a mission. Garland had given me a week to pack up mementos. I was going to use every second of it. I started methodically, carefully. This wasn't a frantic search. It was a forensic investigation. I went through his filing cabinets first. They were filled with decades of property surveys, boundary agreements, and water rights filings for half the county. Each file was a story of a family, a dispute, a dream of building a home. My father's meticulous handwriting was everywhere, a testament to his precision and care. There were notes in the margins, little details about the families, the history of the land, things that had no legal bearing, but were important to him. He didn't just survey land, he chronicled it. Days bled into one another. I worked from sunup to sundown, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of urgency. With every box I packed, every file I sorted, I felt Garland's deadline breathing down my neck. Part of me was terrified I would find nothing, that my faith in my father's foresight was just a daughter's desperate wish. I found old photographs, tucked between ledgers, a picture of me on my first pony, my father holding the reins, his face split by a wide, proud grin. I found his first compass, a beautiful, heavy brass piece he'd kept in a velvet-lined box. These were the mementos Garland would have let me take, the sentimental artifacts of a life, stripped of their context and power. But they weren't what I was looking for. I was looking for a weapon. The subplot of my life, the part Garland had no clue about, was the cidery. Blackwood cider was more than a hobby, it was my future. I had spent the last 2 years developing the business side. I'd built a small but loyal customer base in the city, supplying boutique restaurants and craft bars. I had a meeting scheduled in a month with a regional distributor, a meeting that could take our small operation to the next level. All of that was tied to the orchard, to the unique terroir of our specific piece of land, nestled right where the cool air from the lake met the warm southern slope. The very land Garland was planning to bulldoze for a condo parking lot. This wasn't just about my childhood home, it was about my professional life, my creation, my future. He wasn't just erasing my past, he was trying to annihilate my future. I knew I needed help. I couldn't do this alone. I thought of the town's old guard lawyers, men like Mr. Thompson, who had folded so easily to Garland's money and influence. I couldn't trust them. Then I remembered Maria Sanchez. Her family had a small farm a few miles down the road. She was a few years older than me, sharp as a tack. She'd gone to law school in the city, but had recently come back home to open her own small practice, specializing in land use and agricultural law. She'd helped my father with a water rights issue the year before he died. He had been so impressed with her. That young woman, he'd told me, she doesn't just read the law, she understands the dirt it's written for. She was my only shot. I called her, my voice tight with anxiety. I explained the situation, the will, Garland's developers. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your father was a good man, Ashlyn. He was always fair. What your uncle is doing, it doesn't sound like him. Can you come see me tomorrow? Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Just come." Her voice was calm, professional, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. I had an ally. It was on the 4th day, my hope dwindling, that I found it. In the back corner of the office, behind a stack of old zoning manuals, was a collection of heavy cardboard and leather tubes. They held the master maps, the original surveys of our farm from when my great-grandfather first bought the land. I pulled them out one by one, the smell of dust and history filling the air. I unrolled them on the drafting table. The first was from 1923. The ink faded, the paper brittle. It showed the original parcel. The next, from the 1950s, showed the addition of an adjacent field. I was tracing the history of my family, written in ink and contour lines. The last tube was newer, made of thick, oiled leather. It felt different, heavier. I pulled the cap off and slid out the map inside. It was a recent survey from only 3 years ago. The lines were crisp, the printing modern. It showed the farm as it was today. But there was something else. A new bold line was drawn across the map, sectioning off a 40-acre parcel. the parcel that included the entire waterfront, the bluff, the old oak tree, and my apple orchard. My heart started to beat faster. Tucked into the roll, held in place by a simple rubber band, was another document. It wasn't a map. It was a single sheet of heavy cream-colored paper, folded in three. I unfolded it with trembling hands. The top of the document read Deed of Partition. It was dense with legal language, paragraphs of whereas and hereinafter, but the names and descriptions were crystal clear. It described the 40-acre waterfront parcel, with the kind of meticulous, unassailable detail only a master surveyor could provide. It cited coordinates down to the second. It referenced permanent survey markers my father had driven into the bedrock, and at the bottom it stated that this parcel, legally and officially separated from the larger farm, was to be transferred and held in the sole name of Ashlyn Croft, my name. It was signed by my father, and beside his signature was the heavy embossed seal of the Blackwood County Clerk's office, dated 3 years prior. It was filed, it was legal, it was real. And then I saw the note, a small piece of his personal stationery, the kind he used for writing letters, tucked inside the folded deed. His handwriting was a bit shaky, a little unsteady, but the words were a thunderclap. For my Ashlyn, they can have the dirt, you keep the heart. The breath I'd been holding for 4 days came out in a ragged gasp. It was a masterstroke, a quiet act of rebellion planned years in advance. My father, knowing his brother's nature, knowing his single-minded obsession with monetary value, had surgically removed the farm's most precious asset and placed it in my hands. He had separated the soul from the body. He had left Garland the raw, devalued bulk of the land, the dirt, while ensuring I held its essence, its value, its heart. I sank into his old chair, the worn leather sighing under my weight, and I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a laugh of disbelief, of awe, of ferocious, beautiful, vindicating relief. Garland thought he'd won. He hadn't even been playing the right game. My father had been playing chess, and Garland was about to find out he'd just proudly checkmated himself. My meeting with Maria the next morning was going to be very, very different. I wasn't coming to her as a victim seeking help. I was coming to her as a landowner, with a secret weapon, ready to draw up a battle plan. The next morning, I walked into Maria Sanchez's office, with a new kind of energy. It wasn't the frantic, desperate energy of the past few days. It was a cold, calm, focused power. Her office was on the second floor of an old brick building, on the town square. It was modest, but organized. Books on property law and environmental regulations lined the walls. Instead of a mahogany desk, she had a large, functional wooden table, covered in maps and files. She was a reflection of her space, no nonsense, intelligent, and grounded. I didn't say a word at first. I just walked to the table, cleared a space, and unrolled the leather tube's contents. First, the topographical map, with the new partition line drawn in bold. Then, I placed the deed next to it. Finally, I laid my father's handwritten note beside the deed. I let the documents speak for themselves. Maria leaned over the table, her dark eyes scanning the papers. She picked up the deed, her fingers tracing the embossed seal of the county clerk. She read it once, then read it again, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Holy hell, Ashlyn," she said, her voice a mix of admiration and surprise. "Your father was a genius." She looked up at me, and her smile was fierce. "This is not just a deed. This is a fortress. It's ironclad." She spent the next hour dissecting it, explaining the nuances I hadn't fully grasped. The partition wasn't just a simple line on a map. My father had been strategic, surgical. The 40-acre parcel he'd carved out for me contained not only the entire lake frontage, but also the only viable access point from the main road. The rest of the farm, the dirt that now belonged to Garland, was effectively landlocked for the purposes of major development. There was an old farm track that connected it to a back road, fine for a tractor, but completely inadequate for the construction vehicles and infrastructure a luxury condo project would require. The developers wouldn't be able to run power lines, water mains, or sewer pipes without crossing my land. They couldn't build their promised marina without access to my waterfront. Garland doesn't own a gold mine, Maria said, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the map. He owns a very large, very inaccessible field. Your father didn't just give you the heart, Ashlyn. He gave you the keys. The developers can't build a single thing without your permission. The full weight of my father's brilliance settled over me. It was a move of profound, quiet cunning. He hadn't fought Garland's greed with anger or confrontation. He'd used his own tools, a map, a transit, and an intricate knowledge of the law to neutralize it completely. It wasn't about revenge, I thought again. But this time the thought had a sharper edge. It was about justice. A justice so poetic it was almost painful. Maria leaned back in her chair. All business now. Okay, so Garland has a week to feel like a king. Let him make his calls. Let him promise the world to his developers. The deeper he gets, the harder he'll fall. Our strategy was one of silence and precision. The first step was to reinforce my position. Maria would go to the county clerk's office that afternoon and refile the deed. Not that it needed it, but to create a fresh record of its existence. It was a way of planting a flag, officially and publicly. Step 2 was to get a new survey done, based on the deed. I know a good crew, she said. They're fast, and they're discreet. We'll have them go out and stake the boundary lines of your parcel. Bright orange stakes, bright orange tape. Make it impossible to ignore. Step 3 was the most important. We would do nothing. We would wait. We would let Garland bring the developers to the farm. We would let him walk them around, sell them his vision, let him stand on the bluff overlooking the water and talk about the marina and the clubhouse. And then, at the height of his triumphant performance, the surveyors would arrive. Maria's smile was predatory. We're not going to send him a letter, Ashlyn. We're going to give him a front-row seat to the implosion of his entire plan. For the next few days, I continued to pack, but my work had a different purpose now. I was an actress, playing the part of the defeated daughter for an audience of one Garland. He would call once a day, his voice oozing that fake concern. How are you holding up? Making good progress. Remember, Friday at noon is the deadline. He wanted to make sure I was on schedule to be erased. I'd reply with a quiet, meek yes, Garland, I'll be out. The meekness was a weapon. The subservience was a trap. All the while, Maria was working in the background. She confirmed the survey crew was scheduled for Thursday at 11 a.m. She had personally filed the notice with the county. The gears were in motion. The trap was set. On Wednesday evening, I was in the office, carefully packing my father's books, when I saw headlights coming up the long driveway. It was a sleek, black SUV, the kind that cost more than my truck. Garland was giving his developer, a man named Henderson, a private pre-tour. I watched from the darkened window of the office as they got out. Garland was in his element, his arms spread wide as if presenting his kingdom. Henderson was tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed. He looked confident, sharp, the kind of man who didn't suffer fools. They walked the property line, Garland talking and gesturing, Henderson nodding, his face impassive. They walked right up to the bluff. They stood on my land, on the land my father had secured for me. They stood under the great oak, its branches silhouetted against the twilight sky. Garland clapped Henderson on the back, and I could imagine his words. Imagine it, Henderson. A 5-star restaurant right here, a marina down there, the crown jewel of the eastern seaboard. I felt a surge of cold fury, the arrogance, the presumption. They were standing in the heart of my home, divvying it up like pirates splitting treasure. I stayed in the shadows, my knuckles white as I gripped the windowsill. Tomorrow, I thought, tomorrow the land speaks. Thursday morning arrived, bright and clear. It was the kind of beautiful late autumn day that felt like a gift. At 10:30, another black SUV, this one followed by a luxury sedan, made its way up the drive. The developers had arrived in force. Garland met them at the front of the house, beaming like a lottery winner. He was wearing a crisp new jacket and polished boots, playing the part of the country squire. I watched from the office window, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum against my ribs. This was it. The silent takeover was about to begin. Garland led the group of about 5 men, all in expensive casual wear, on a tour. He started with the main fields, talking about grading and foundations. They slowly made their way toward the prize, the waterfront. They walked past my orchard, and I saw Garland wave a dismissive hand at it, probably explaining how easily it could be cleared. They were laughing, enjoying the sunshine, enjoying the prospect of millions of dollars in profit. They climbed the gentle slope to the bluff. Garland stood at the very edge, his back to me, his arms outstretched in that same grandiose gesture. He was selling the view, selling the dream. And then, right on schedule, a white work truck with the logo Precision Land Surveying pulled up the drive. 2 men got out, dressed in bright yellow safety vests. They unloaded their equipment with practiced efficiency: the transit, the rods, the heavy mallets, and a large spool of bright orange plastic tape. They didn't even look toward Garland and his group. They had their own set of plans, a copy of my deed and my map, and they went to work. One of the surveyors walked to a small, almost invisible metal pin in the ground near the driveway, one of my father's permanent markers, and set up the transit. The other walked off, rod in hand, following instructions I couldn't hear. Then came the sound, a loud, percussive thwack, as the first wooden stake was hammered into the ground, followed by another and another. Garland and his group turned. Their casual, confident postures stiffened. They saw the surveyors, and a look of annoyance crossed Garland's face. He probably thought they were on the wrong property. He started to walk toward them, his hands on his hips, ready to tell them off. But then he saw where they were driving the stakes. They weren't on the edge of the property. They were cutting a line directly between him and the road, a line that cordoned off the entire waterfront. I saw him stop. I saw the confusion on his face. The developers were murmuring among themselves, their expressions shifting from interest to concern. The surveyors continued their work, unrolling the bright orange tape, paying it from stake to stake, a vibrant, undeniable scar across Garland's perfect vision, a fence made of plastic and truth. Garland strode over to the lead surveyor, his voice sharp and angry, audible even from the house. "What the hell do you think you're doing? This is private property." The surveyor, a burly man with a calm demeanor, didn't even flinch. He just pulled a folded document from his vest pocket and handed it to my uncle. It was a work order, with a copy of my deed attached. I saw Garland's eyes scan the page. I saw the blood drain from his face. His confident swagger evaporated, replaced by a slack-jawed disbelief. He looked from the paper in his hand to the orange tape, then back to the paper. His gaze lifted, and for the first time, he looked toward the house, his eyes searching, and they found me, a silhouette in the dark window of my father's office. The look on his face was a masterpiece of crumbling arrogance. It was shock, it was rage, and beneath it all, it was the dawning, horrific understanding that he had been completely and utterly outmaneuvered. Henderson, the lead developer, walked over, his expression now one of icy impatience. "Garland, what's going on? Who are these men?" Garland just sputtered. He couldn't form a coherent sentence. He just pointed a trembling finger at the deed in his hand, then at the house. The surveyor, seeing his opportunity, handed a second copy of the documents to Henderson. Henderson read it quickly, his sharp eyes missing nothing. He looked at the map, at the legal description, and then at the bright orange fence that now stood between his multi-million-dollar investment and the water. He looked at Garland, his eyes cold and hard with contempt. "You told me you had clear title and full access," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You wasted my time." He turned without another word, motioned to his men, and they all walked back to their cars. They didn't look back. The engines started, and the sleek black vehicles drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and humiliation in their wake. Garland was left standing alone in the middle of his worthless field, clutching a piece of paper that had just destroyed his world. He looked up at the window again, his face a mask of pure, impotent fury. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just stood there, in the quiet of my father's office, and watched. The land was remembering, and it was taking my side. The aftermath was a symphony of silence. Garland didn't call. He didn't storm up to the house. He just disappeared. For 2 full days, there was nothing. The bright orange tape fluttered in the breeze, a constant, cheerful reminder of my victory. The deadline, Friday at noon, came and went. I was still there. I was still packing, but now it was at a leisurely pace, sorting through my father's life with love instead of panic. The power had shifted so completely, it was like the laws of physics had been rewritten on the farm. Gravity now flowed from my 40 acres, from my waterfront, from the heart of the land. On Monday morning, I got a call. It wasn't from Garland, it was from Henderson, the developer. His tone was completely different. There was no arrogance, no impatience. It was respectful, professional, almost cautious. "Miss Croft," he said, "it seems there was a significant misunderstanding regarding the Blackwood Farm property. My legal team has reviewed the partition deed you filed. It is, to put it mildly, airtight." I stayed silent, letting him talk. "We are of course still very interested in the area," he continued. "We believe a high-end, environmentally sensitive development would be a great asset to the community. However, our original proposal is obviously no longer viable." His meaning was clear. His project was dead without access to my land. "I have to admit," he said, a note of grudging respect in his voice, "your father was a hell of a planner." He then made his pitch. He wanted to know if I would be willing to discuss selling an easement, a right-of-way for road and utilities. He started talking numbers, big numbers, the kind of numbers that could change a person's life. I let him finish. Then I said, "Mr. Henderson, I appreciate the offer, but the land is not for sale, and I have no interest in granting an easement for a condo development." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I imagine it was the first time in a long time anyone had told him no so directly. "I'm not sure you understand," he started. "I am prepared to offer." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted, my voice calm and firm. "My father did not preserve this land for me, just so I could sell it to the first person who offered a check. However, I am expanding my family's cider business. It's possible I might be looking for investors or partners for a new tasting room and a small farm-to-table restaurant on the property, a project that honors the land, instead of paving over it. If that is something your firm has any interest in, you can have your people draw up a proposal and send it to my lawyer, Maria Sanchez." Then I gave him her number and politely ended the call. I had turned his bulldozers into a potential business opportunity. My opportunity, on my terms. It was later that afternoon that Garland finally surfaced. His expensive car crawled up the driveway like a wounded animal. He got out, and he looked smaller. The tailored suit was rumpled. The arrogant posture was gone, replaced by a defeated slump. He didn't come to the house. He walked to the orange tape, to the new border between his world and mine, and he just stood there, staring at the water he couldn't touch. I walked out to meet him. He stayed on my side of the tape. He looked at me, and the rage was still there, but it was buried under a thick layer of desperation. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" he spat. "Your father's little trick." I said nothing. "This is my land, Ashlyn. The will gives you the dirt, Garland," I said, my voice quiet. "Dad was very specific. You get the dirt, I get the heart." He flinched, as if I'd slapped him. He tried a different tactic, the one he was best at, bullying. "I'll sue you. I'll drag you through court for years. You'll be broke before you see a cent from this. Maria already prepared me for this. My title is clear, Garland. Any lawsuit you file would be deemed frivolous. You'd be paying my legal fees." His face crumpled. The threats were hollow, and he knew it. The desperation took over completely. He resorted to begging. "Ashlyn, please. We're family." Henderson offered millions. "Millions. We can split it. 70-30. You and me. We can both walk away rich." It was pathetic. He was offering me a piece of what was already mine, a fraction of a deal that only existed because of me. This wasn't about the money, Garland, I said, the words tasting like truth on my tongue. It was never about the money. For you, maybe it was. For me, it's about this. I gestured to the orchard, the bluff, the old house. It's about home. His face twisted into an ugly sneer. Home, it's a pile of old wood and some muddy fields. You're just like him, a sentimental fool, sitting on a fortune you're too stupid to cash in. And in that moment, I felt a wave of pity for him. He would never understand. He was blind to any value he couldn't quantify. He was the one who was truly poor. I have to get back to my packing, Garland, I said, turning to walk away. You have a lot of land to manage. I hope you figure out what to do with it. That was the final blow. The reminder that he was now saddled with a massive devalued property that he had no use for, with property taxes to pay, and no windfall to pay them with. His victory had become his prison. The power shift was absolute. I held the heart, and he was left with nothing but the dirt. The final confrontation, if you could call it that, was almost anticlimactic. It happened a week later. I was on the porch, talking on the phone with Maria, discussing Henderson's surprisingly creative proposal for a partnership in the new cidery venture. He was a shark, but a smart one, and he knew when to change his hunting strategy. A dusty pickup truck I didn't recognize came up the drive and stopped at the edge of my property line. A man in his 60s, with a weathered face and work-worn hands, got out. It was Jed Olson, who owned the large dairy farm to the west. He gave me a friendly nod. "Morning, Ashlyn. Just wanted to let you know your uncle accepted my offer." "My offer?" I asked, confused. "Yeah," he said, kicking at a rock with his boot. "He sold me his parcel. The whole thing. Got it for a song. Frankly, said he was moving down south and wanted to unload it quick. He couldn't afford the taxes on land he couldn't develop. It was perfect for me. I've been needing new grazing pasture for years." Jed smiled. "Your dad would be happy. He always said this land was meant for farming, not for golf courses." And just like that, it was over. Garland was gone. Not with a bang, but with a quiet, desperate sale to a neighboring farmer. He'd taken his dirt and sold it for pennies on the dollar, just to escape the trap he had laid for himself. My father's land, the part Garland had stolen, was going back to being what it was always meant to be, a working farm. It was the most perfect poetic justice I could have imagined. My vindication wasn't about destroying my uncle. It was about watching him be defeated by his own greed, by his complete inability to understand the true nature of value. A few days later, I drove into town and went to the county courthouse. I walked up to the public records counter and filed a new document. It was a simple one, a business registration for the Blackwood Heart Cidery and Tasting Room. My name was listed as founder and sole proprietor. I took the stamped copy, walked out into the sunshine, and felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt since before my father passed. Later that afternoon, I was back in his office. It was almost empty now, the boxes neatly stacked and labeled. The only thing left on the drafting table was the topographical map, the deed, and his handwritten note. I picked up the note. "For my Ashlyn, they can have the dirt, you keep the heart." I bought a simple, elegant frame, and I placed the note inside it. I would hang it in the new tasting room, right over the bar, a reminder, a foundation, a testament to a father's love and a surveyor's foresight. I stood on the bluff, looking out over the water. The orange tape was gone. The only lines on the land now were the ones my father had known, the ones that told the story of 100 years of my family. My family. The developers Henderson's group had become eager partners, their resources now aimed at building something sustainable and beautiful, a place that celebrated the land. The cidery was expanding. We were breaking ground next spring. I had taken the heart of the farm, and I was making it beat stronger than ever. The smug smile on Garland's face in that lawyer's office felt like a memory from another lifetime. He thought he'd won. He thought he could erase me, But he and the will he'd used as a weapon were just noise. My father's plan, his love, that was the signal. It was quiet, patient, and in the end it was the only thing that mattered. My father always said the land remembers. He was right, but I know now what he was really teaching me. It's not just the soil and the trees that have a memory. It's love, it's integrity. That's the legacy that's written on the heart, not on a piece of paper in a lawyer's office. What Garland tried to do was built on a foundation of greed, and it crumbled under its own weight. What my father built for me was on a foundation of love, and it was unshakable. He didn't just give me a piece of property, he gave me a final lesson. He taught me that the greatest power doesn't come from shouting or fighting. It comes from knowing the terrain, from planning your moves with care, and from having faith in the truth. He cheated gravity in a way. He made sure the things with real weight, love, legacy, home, would rise, while the hollow things would fall away. This story isn't just about a farm. It's for anyone who has ever been underestimated, who has been told their worth, who has had something precious threatened by someone who can only see in dollar signs. Your value is not determined by their spreadsheet. Your strength is not measured by their approval. The most powerful moves you will ever make are the ones you plan in silence, the foundations you lay when no one is watching. The world is full of people who want to sell the heart to develop the dirt. Don't let them. Your heart, your integrity, your unique contribution, that is the most valuable parcel you will ever own. Protect it, nurture it, and know that its value is absolute. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for your own piece of the world, I'd be grateful if you'd like this video and leave a comment below. It helps to know these stories are building a community. And if you want to hear more stories about how quiet competence can overcome loud arrogance, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. It's a small click, but it sends a powerful signal. Until next time, know your worth and hold on to the heart.